The first thing that hit me when I opened my eyes in the sterile hospital room was the eerie silence. There was no soft beep of medical equipment, no rustling of paper, no faint hum of the overhead lights. Just a profound, unsettling stillness that seemed to hang in the air. It felt wrong. Something wasn't right. I tried to move, but my body felt heavy, as if I were made of lead. My thoughts came in slow, sluggish waves, but one thing was clear: I was alive, and that was a small miracle. I heard my own breath, shallow and ragged, filling the space where there was supposed to be noise. The last thing I remembered was the crash. A sudden flash of lights, the screech of tires, and then darkness. The door to my room creaked open, and I turned my head, my vision blurred at the edges. It was Carla, my best friend. She looked as though she'd been running, her face pale and strained, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. "Jenna, you're awake." "Thank God," she whispered, her voice breaking. I tried to speak, but my throat felt dry, sore. I only managed a weak smile in response. "You're lucky to be alive," a voice interrupted. I glanced to the side to see Dr. Foster, the hospital's chief surgeon. "The accident was severe. You've got some broken ribs, a concussion, and a lot of bruising. But you're going to be okay. It's going to take some time, though." I nodded, not fully absorbing his words. My mind was elsewhere, swirling with questions. What happened? Why was I here? Where was Lily? Carla must have seen the confusion in my eyes. "Lily's fine," she said quickly. "She's staying with your cousin Sarah for now while you recover." Relief washed over me, but just as quickly an unsettling feeling crept in. The questions I had been avoiding bubbled to the surface. What happened with the car? Carla hesitated, biting her lip, her eyes darting to the side. "It's complicated." "Complicated?" I repeated, my voice trembling. She took a deep breath, sitting down on the edge of the bed. "Jenna, you're going to hate me for this, but you need to know. Your brother, Ben, he sold the car." The words hit me like a slap in the face. The car wasn't just any car, it was a special van we had customized for Lily. It was more than just a mode of transport, it was a lifeline. Without it, getting around would be impossible for her. It was bought with the last of our savings after our father passed away, a decision that took years of sacrifice. My mind blanked as I tried to process what she had just said. "What do you mean, sold it?" I whispered. "Ben came here while you were unconscious," Carla explained, her voice tight. "He brought papers, said you signed them. He sold the van to some guy in town. Said it was for an investment." The world tilted. The room spun. I felt dizzy, nauseous. "He can't. He didn't." My voice was barely a whisper. Carla grabbed my hand, squeezing it tightly. "I tried to stop him, I did, but he convinced everyone you were fine with it. He said you wouldn't need the van anymore, that you had insurance." "Insurance?" I scoffed. "How could anyone think that? Lily needs that van." I grabbed my phone, my hands shaking. The screen lit up with several missed calls, but one number stood out: Ben. I dialed it with trembling fingers, my pulse quickening. It rang twice before he picked up, his voice almost too calm. "Hey sis, feeling better?" "Where's the van?" I asked, my voice harsh. "Sold it," he replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. "I got a great price for it. Don't worry though, I'm making things right. This crypto investment is gonna pay off big, and I'll make sure you get your share." I felt my blood boil, a cold, seething anger bubbling up from the pit of my stomach. "You had no right, Ben. None. How could you sell it?" "Relax," he laughed, the sound grating in my ears. "It's just a van. Lily can use regular transportation like everyone else. Stop being so precious about it." I hung up, my fingers still trembling from the rage coursing through me. I looked at the phone, disbelief still hanging over me. He had sold the one thing that made it possible for Lily to have some semblance of independence, and he had done it behind my back, while I lay here in this bed. I let out a shaky breath, trying to steady myself. The anger that had been building inside me felt endless. But beneath that anger, something else was stirring. A cold, calculated resolve. Because what Ben didn't know, and what my family would soon find out, was that I had spent years preparing for something like this. It was quiet again, too quiet. The silence in the hospital room pressed on me, suffocating. I wanted to scream, but all I could do was sit there, staring at my phone, my mind reeling. My brother had crossed a line this time, and there would be consequences. He had no idea what he had started. I had worked too hard to get where I was, too hard to build what I had. And now he was trying to take it all away. The van, the one thing that gave Lily a little bit of freedom, was gone. My family, the ones who should have had my back, had helped him do it. They had always enabled him, always turned a blind eye. But not anymore. Carla sat across from me, her face pale, eyes wide with concern. "Jenna, are you sure you're okay? You look like you're about to snap." I looked up at her, my thoughts clouded. "I'm fine, Elite. I just need to think." Her voice was soft. "You don't have to do this alone. Let me help you." I shook my head. "No, Carla. I've been doing it alone for too long. It's time to stop relying on them. It's time for me to fix this my way." I wasn't sure what I was planning yet, but I knew one thing for sure: I wasn't going to let Ben get away with this. He had crossed a line, and now it was my turn to show him what it meant to mess with me. The first thing I did was set up an emergency meeting with Jacob, the lawyer I'd been working with for the past year. I had learned long ago that the best way to deal with people like Ben was to be prepared, completely prepared. And I had spent years making sure that when the time came, I would be ready. Jacob arrived at the hospital later that afternoon, looking as sharp as always. His tailored suit and the confident air he carried had always put me at ease. He sat down beside me, his expression serious. "Jenna, I know you're angry, but we need to approach this carefully. Ben might have made a huge mistake, but we can't react emotionally." I glared at him. "I'm not going to let him get away with this, Jacob. I want that van back, and I want him to pay for what he's done." He nodded, understanding the fire in my voice. "We can do that. But we need to take the proper steps. First, we need to prove that the sale was fraudulent. That means we'll need to track down the buyer and get everything in writing. Then we need to freeze Ben's assets and stop him from accessing anything before it's too late." I clenched my fists, feeling the weight of the plan settle in. I want to make sure he feels every ounce of this. He's been getting away with everything his entire life. It's time for that to end. Jacob leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "You're talking about going after his finances, his reputation. This won't be a simple case. We need to be strategic. But I think we can bring him down." I nodded. "I don't care what it takes. He sold our daughter's independence for gambling money. This goes beyond just the van. It's everything he's done to me, to Lily. I want him to know that there are consequences for this." Jacob took a deep breath. "Then let's get started." We spent the next few hours mapping out the details. Every step, every document, every transaction that needed to be uncovered. It felt good, empowering even, to take control of the situation. Ben had no idea what was coming for him. By the time Jacob left, I had a new sense of clarity. I wasn't just a victim in this story anymore. I was the one who would dictate the terms from now on. I spent the next few days in a blur of activity. I called the bank, freezing every account I could that was linked to Ben or any of his assets. I contacted the buyer of the van, using a contact I had from my years of dealing with various legal matters. The buyer was surprisingly cooperative, agreeing to return the van as soon as we proved the sale was fraudulent. But the real work was just beginning. The hardest part was dealing with my family. They still didn't understand the gravity of what Ben had done. Mom kept texting, telling me to let it go, that family was more important than a stupid van. But it wasn't about the van anymore. It was about everything Ben had done to us, to Lily. It was about the fact that my family had always allowed him to get away with it. And the worst part? They still didn't see it. I met with Carla one evening at her apartment, trying to keep my mind off things. We were sitting on her couch, a bottle of wine between us, when my phone buzzed. It was a message from Ben. "Jenna, stop being dramatic. The van's gone, get over it. You're making a big deal out of nothing. We're family. Just let it go, okay?" I stared at the screen, fury rising in my chest. I didn't even have to think. I typed my response quickly, my fingers shaking with rage. "You don't get to tell me what's dramatic, Ben. You sold the one thing that mattered to my daughter and you think I'm going to get over it? You have no idea who you're dealing with. You're about to find out. I hit send, feeling a small sense of satisfaction. Ben thought this was just some petty issue. But he had no idea how deep this was going to go. I sat back on the couch, staring at the phone, knowing that this was only the beginning. I was going to make him regret everything he had done. The days blurred together in a haze of activity. Between meetings with Jacob, tracking down paperwork, and dealing with the mess my family had left behind, there was no time for rest. But every new piece of information, every small victory, made the weight of what Ben had done feel a little lighter, a little more bearable. The van was the first priority, of course. I kept in close contact with the buyer, ensuring that he understood the situation. He was cooperative, which surprised me. Most people would have tried to make a quick buck off of a mistake like this, but not him. Still, there was no telling how long it would take for the legal process to resolve. It was clear that this was going to drag on. The more I dug into Ben's finances, the more I uncovered. A tangled mess of bad investments, failed business ventures, and gambling debts. I was shocked at how deep it went. How had no one seen this before? My parents had always been in denial, turning a blind eye to the damage Ben had caused. It was always easier for them to blame me, to tell me I was too hard on him, to dismiss my concerns. They'd always defended him. But not anymore. Every conversation with Carla felt like I was speaking to a stranger. She didn't get it. She didn't understand the gravity of what I was up against. "Jenna," she said one evening as we sat in her living room, sipping wine, "why don't you just let it go? You've been through so much already. You're not going to get the van back and Ben's not going to change." She was right about one thing, I wasn't going to get the van back easily. But I couldn't just let it go. Not now. Not after everything. I looked at her, my face hardening. "Carla, you don't get it. This isn't just about the van. It's about everything. He's been draining the family dry for years. And I've had enough." "Then what are you going to do? Destroy him?" she asked, her voice tinged with disbelief. I shook my head, the anger simmering beneath the surface. "I'm not going to destroy him. I'm going to expose him. And I'm going to make him pay for every single thing he's done." I knew it was risky. Going after Ben meant going up against my entire family. But what choice did I have? I'd already spent years protecting them, shielding them from his lies, from his schemes. But now he had crossed the line. He'd sold our daughter's van, stolen her independence. And he thought he could get away with it. No more. I met with Jacob the next morning to discuss the next steps. "We're getting closer," he said, his tone measured. "I've got the buyer's statement and I've already contacted the fraud department at the bank. But we need to move fast. The longer this goes on, the harder it's going to be to make a case." "Then let's move," I said, my voice steady. "We're going after him with everything we've got." Jacob nodded, pulling out a stack of papers. "We'll need to file for asset freezing. That way he won't be able to access anything while the investigation is ongoing. We can also start the process of reporting the forged documents and the fraudulent sale." As we went over the details, a sense of calm washed over me. For the first time in days, I felt like I was in control. Ben had taken so much from me, from Lily. But now it was my turn. I wasn't going to let him win. The next few days were a whirlwind. I filed the necessary paperwork and Jacob worked tirelessly behind the scenes, contacting the authorities, gathering the evidence we needed. It wasn't easy, but I had prepared for this moment. Years of financial planning, years of protecting myself and my assets, everything had been leading up to this. I couldn't help but feel a little satisfaction as the wheels of justice began to turn. It wasn't a quick process, but it was happening. I could see the end of this nightmare in sight. But there was still one thing I had to do: confront my parents. I'd been putting it off, but I knew it was time. I couldn't avoid them forever. I couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine when I knew the truth. They had enabled Ben for years. They had allowed him to manipulate them, to steal from them. And now they had to face the consequences of their actions. I called my mother that evening. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. Her response was immediate, defensive. "What about? What's this all about, Jenna? I'm coming over, I said, my heart pounding in my chest. We're going to talk about Ben. When I arrived at their house, I could feel the tension in the air. My mother was sitting at the kitchen table, her arms crossed, while my father stood by the window, staring out at the yard. It was like nothing had changed. Like everything was still the same. Jenna, we've already told you, my mother said, her voice tight. Ben's under a lot of stress. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. I took a deep breath, trying to remain calm. You don't get it, Mom. He didn't just hurt me. He hurt Lily. He sold her van, the one thing that gives her some independence, and you think it's okay. Jenna, he's our son, my father interjected, his voice weary. We've always supported him. By enabling him, I shot back. By letting him get away with everything he's done. You know what? I'm done. You should have protected Lily. You should have protected me. But instead you let him do whatever he wanted, and now look at where we are. My mother's face turned pale and she looked away, tears filling her eyes. I didn't know, Jenna. I didn't know he'd gone this far. That's the problem, Mom, I said quietly. You never knew. Because you didn't want to know. I turned to leave, but my father's voice stopped me. You're not going to fix this by making it worse. Maybe not, I said, my voice low, but I can't keep pretending like everything's okay. Not when Lily's been hurt. Not when Ben's done this. I walked out of the house, feeling a weight lift off my shoulders. I had said what needed to be said. Now it was up to them to figure out what came next. It wasn't until the next morning that the full scope of my actions truly began to hit me. I had walked away from my parents, but in doing so I had left behind more than just the familiar pain of their indifference. I had left behind the remnants of a family that, for better or worse, had always been my anchor. Now that anchor had been severed. But as I drove through the empty streets, the weight of what I had done didn't feel like a burden. It felt like freedom. It was the first time in years that I had chosen myself, chosen Lily, over the toxic dynamics that had suffocated us. And it felt right. When I arrived home, the air seemed clearer somehow. The house was quiet, still, like the calm before the storm. And in a way, I felt like I was bracing for what was to come. I opened the door to find Lily in the living room, her face lit up by the glow of her tablet. She looked up when I walked in, a smile tugging at her lips. Mom, did you talk to Grandma? I froze. There was a faint tremor in her voice, one that I could almost taste in the air. How much had she overheard? How much had she understood? I didn't want to lie to her, but I didn't want to burden her with the weight of everything either. I sat beside her on the couch, taking her hand in mine. Yes, I did. But you don't need to worry about that right now. Everything's going to be okay. Her eyes, sharp as ever, studied me for a moment before she nodded. Are you sure, Mom? You don't look okay. I took a deep breath. I'm going to be fine, sweetheart. We're going to be fine. I smiled, but it didn't quite reach my eyes. Everything's going to change now, Lily. For the better. Her smile was hesitant, as if she wasn't entirely convinced. I know. But are we really okay, Mom? What if Grandma and Grandpa are mad at us? I ran my fingers through her hair, my heart aching for her. They're not going to hurt us anymore, Lily. We don't need them to be okay. Lily nodded slowly, still unsure, but she let it go. I could tell that part of her still wanted to believe that everything would magically fall into place if we just played along, if we just made peace. But deep down, we both knew that peace wasn't an option anymore. Not with Ben, not with my parents. Not after everything that had happened. I forced myself to push the heavy thoughts aside. For now, I had to focus on what came next. The next few days felt like a waiting game. Each time I checked my phone, I saw new messages from my parents, all of them pleading, all of them attempting to manipulate the situation. But this time, I wasn't buying it. I didn't care how much they tried to gaslight me or how many times they told me to let it go. I had set a course and there was no turning back. Jacob kept me updated on the legal proceedings. The buyer had agreed to return the van, and the fraud investigation was moving forward. Ben's assets were being frozen, but the legal battles were going to take time. I had expected that, and I was ready to fight for as long as it took. But then came the phone call I hadn't been expecting. It was Ben. Jenna, come on. You've made your point. This isn't the way to do this. We're family, he said, his voice coming through the phone with an odd mix of desperation and arrogance. I didn't answer immediately. I just let his words hang in the air between us, the silence speaking louder than anything he could say. Do you really think I'm going to let you just walk away with everything, Jenna? He continued, his voice growing louder. I didn't sell the damn van to hurt you. I did it to help us all. You don't even get it, do you? This is for our future. For our future? I repeated, incredulous. You sold my daughter's independence, Ben. How does that help anyone? How is that for our future? I could hear him fumble with his words, the arrogance slipping away. I didn't mean for it to get this far, he muttered. No, you didn't, I said coldly. But you did it anyway. He was silent for a moment before he spoke again. I'm sorry, okay. I'm sorry about the van. But you need to understand, I'm not going to let you ruin me over this. I'm your brother. We're supposed to stick together. You're not my brother anymore, I said, each word coming out like ice. You're nothing more than a thief who took from me and my daughter. And I'm done trying to protect you. You crossed a line, Ben. And now you're going to have to face the consequences. I hung up before he could respond, the sound of his angry breath still echoing in my ears. For the first time in my life, I felt nothing but cold certainty. Ben had pushed me too far, and I wasn't going to let him win. Not this time. Later that day, I received another message from Jacob. The banks have frozen everything. We've got a clear path to file for the full recovery of the van, and I've started the paperwork for the civil suit. This is just the beginning. I let out a breath I didn't realize I was holding. Things were finally moving in the right direction. The storm was coming and I was ready. The phone calls, the emails, the constant barrage of messages, they never stopped coming. My parents still didn't get it. They couldn't seem to understand that this wasn't just about a van or a misunderstanding. This was about my daughter's future. This was about trust, something they had long since destroyed. And yet they insisted that I was overreacting. That Ben would come around. That it was just a phase. It wasn't a phase. It was betrayal. I spent the next few days doing what I did best, preparing. I wasn't going to let this slip through the cracks. I knew Ben. He'd always been slippery, always managed to talk his way out of trouble, always played the victim. But this time he wasn't going to have that luxury. This time I had the truth on my side. And the law. Lily and I spent the morning at the park. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day that seemed to promise something good, something bright in a world that had felt so dark for far too long. She wheeled herself around, her smile as wide as the sky. I watched her with a mixture of pride and sorrow. Pride because she was strong, stronger than I had ever been at her age. Sorrow because she had to grow up faster than any child should. We hadn't had a real family day in a long time, not without interruptions from Ben or my parents. Today it was just the two of us, and for a moment I felt like I could breathe again. That was the first thing I wanted to protect, her peace. Her happiness. The phone buzzed in my pocket, but I ignored it. I needed this time with her. I needed to show her that we could make it, even if our family had failed us. But the buzzing wouldn't stop. I finally pulled my phone out and saw that it was a message from Jacob. The moment I read it, my stomach sank. The bank has flagged Ben's personal accounts. They're investigating his transactions. I'm sending over a list of everything we need for the fraud case. I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or dread. This was it. This was the moment when everything would change. The moment Ben could no longer hide behind lies. I stood up, my heart racing, and looked down at Lily. I have to go, sweetheart. Something's happening, but I'll be right back, okay? She nodded, her gaze steady. She understood more than anyone ever gave her credit for. Just be careful, Mom. Her words echoed in my mind as I walked back to the car, my mind whirling with plans. This wasn't just about the van anymore. This wasn't just about me. This was about showing Ben and everyone else that no one could keep taking from us. Not anymore. The drive back to my apartment felt like the longest one yet. The anticipation of what was to come gripped me, but there was no turning back now. This was happening, and I was going to make sure Ben paid for every single lie, every ounce of manipulation. By the time I arrived at my place, Jacob had already sent over everything I needed. The bank records. The proof of Ben's transactions. Everything was laid out, neatly organized, with one glaringly obvious truth: Ben had been stealing. And he had been doing it for a long time. I stared at the documents, disbelief still creeping into my bones. How had we let this go on for so long? How had I been so blind to the web of lies he had spun around us? I should have known. I should have seen the signs. But it didn't matter now. The truth was finally out, and nothing could change that. My phone buzzed again, pulling me from my thoughts. This time it was a call from Ben. I almost didn't answer. But I had to. I needed to hear what he would say now. "Jenna, what the hell is going on?" He spat, his voice dripping with venom. "Why are you doing this to me?" I let out a long breath, steadying myself. "You did this to yourself, Ben. You crossed a line. You sold Lily's van. You lied. And now you're going to face the consequences." He laughed bitterly, the sound sending a shiver down my spine. "You really think I'm going to let you get away with this? You think you can just ruin me?" I was done with his threats, done with the manipulation. "I'm not trying to ruin you, Ben. You're doing that all on your own." I hung up before he could say anything else, my hand shaking as I put the phone down. This was it. The storm was finally here. And I wasn't about to back down. The next few days felt like a blur of strategy and quiet tension. I spent my time gathering the last of the necessary evidence, meeting with Jacob to review our options, and preparing for the inevitable fallout. I knew Ben wouldn't go down without a fight, he never did. But this time there would be no running away. There would be no smooth talk, no manipulation. The walls were closing in on him, and there was nowhere for him to hide. I couldn't help but think about the times I had let things slide. How many years had I spent protecting him? How many times had I looked the other way, pretending that everything was fine, hoping that one day he'd get his act together? I had been a fool to believe that he would ever change. People like Ben didn't change. They only dug deeper, taking more and more until there was nothing left to take. The phone buzzed again, and this time it wasn't Jacob. It was a message from my mother. "Jenna, please. This is tearing us apart. Ben is your brother. Don't do this to him. He's made mistakes, yes, but he's still family. You don't have to destroy him over a mistake. Please come to your senses." I stared at the message, feeling a wave of disgust rise within me. A mistake. I muttered to myself. This isn't a mistake. This is theft. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their lies. They had chosen Ben over me, over Lily. And now they were reaping the consequences of their actions. I was done trying to fix everything for them. I was done trying to make excuses for their mistakes. It was time for them to face the truth, even if they didn't like it. That evening I met with Jacob again, going over the final details of the case. The more we dug, the more we uncovered. Ben had not only sold the van, but he had also been siphoning money from family accounts, using our trust to fund his gambling addiction. And the worst part? He had forged my signature on documents, trying to cover his tracks. The fraud was clear. There was no denying it anymore. "We're ready," Jacob said, looking up from his laptop. "I filed the necessary paperwork to freeze his accounts. The fraud investigation is moving forward, and we have the documentation we need to prove the sale was fraudulent." I nodded, my mind spinning with everything that was at stake. What's the next step? We move forward with the civil suit. We'll press for the full return of the van, and we'll hold him accountable for the theft. But you need to be prepared. He's going to fight back. This isn't going to be easy. I wasn't afraid of the fight. I had spent my entire life standing up for what was right, even when it was hard. This was no different. Ben had made his choices, and now it was time for him to face the consequences. The next morning I received another message from my mother. She had tried calling several times, but I had ignored it. This time the message was different. It was more desperate. "I know you're angry. But please don't do this. We are family. We can fix this. Don't destroy everything just because Ben made a mistake. He's still your brother. Please come home. I can't lose you two. I read the message several times, feeling a sickening sense of betrayal welling up inside me. How could she be so blind? How could she still protect him after everything he had done? How could she still make excuses for him even now? But I didn't reply. I couldn't. There was nothing left to say to her. She had made her choice. And now so had I. A few hours later, I received another text from Jacob. Ben's trying to withdraw more money. This time, he's going through your parents' accounts. He's getting desperate. I wasn't surprised. Ben had always been a gambler, always looking for a way out of his mess. But this time, he wasn't going to win. This time, he was going to lose everything. The next few days were a whirlwind of legal filings, phone calls, and meetings. We were moving quickly and Ben was starting to panic. I could feel it. He had tried to contact me again, but I had ignored his calls. There was nothing he could say that would change what had already happened. Then came the final blow. I was sitting in my living room when the doorbell rang. I opened it to find a man in a suit standing there, holding a stack of papers. "Are you Jenna Parker?" he asked, his voice polite but firm. "Yes," I replied, my stomach tightening. "What is this?" He handed me the papers. "This is a formal notice of investigation. Your brother, Benjamin Parker, is under investigation for multiple counts of fraud, theft, and forgery. You are required to cooperate with the authorities in the upcoming investigation." I took the papers from him, my hands shaking slightly. This was it. The storm had arrived. Ben was finally being held accountable for what he had done. And I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief. It was over. He couldn't hide anymore. But even as I stared at the papers in my hands, I knew that the real work was just beginning. This wasn't going to be a quick fix. There would be battles ahead and there would be pain. But I had made my choice and I wasn't going to back down now. I looked up at the man standing at my door. "Thank you," I said quietly. "I'll be in touch." He nodded and turned to leave, but before he walked away, he paused. "You're doing the right thing," he said, his voice low but firm. "You have nothing to be ashamed of." I closed the door and leaned against it, the weight of his words settling in. I had done the right thing. For Lily. For myself. And for the future. The days that followed felt like a slow, grinding march toward justice. It wasn't the swift, satisfying victory I had imagined, but rather a series of small, hard-won battles. I found myself waking up every morning with the same determination that had gotten me this far. Ben had taken everything from me, and now it was my turn to take it back. I spent my mornings meeting with Jacob, reviewing the documents we had accumulated, tightening the legal net around Ben. The more we uncovered, the more I realized just how deep his deceit ran. Not just with the van, but with everything. The accounts he had siphoned from. The debts he had buried under lies. He had always been the family favorite, the charming one, the one everyone turned to when they needed help. But beneath that surface was a man who had been taking, and never once had he considered the consequences. The first victory came when the bank confirmed that they had frozen all of Ben's personal accounts. They had flagged the suspicious withdrawals and began their own investigation into his financial transactions. I could hardly contain the relief that rushed through me when I received the email. This was only the beginning, but it was a step in the right direction. The second victory came a day later, when the fraud department contacted me to confirm that they had initiated a full investigation into the forged paperwork. Ben's attempt to pass off fake documents to sell the van had finally caught up with him. And though it wasn't over yet, I could see the walls closing in. I sat at my kitchen table, the papers spread out before me. For the first time in a long while, I felt a sense of control. The legal process was slow, but it was relentless. The truth was undeniable, and Ben wouldn't be able to talk his way out of it this time. But then the phone rang. I didn't recognize the number, but I answered it anyway. The voice on the other end was smooth, calm, and far too familiar. "Jenna," Ben said, his voice dripping with false sweetness, "we need to talk." I could hear the desperation in his tone, and it made me feel sick. "We've talked enough," I replied coldly. "You sold Lily's van, Ben. You sold the one thing that gives her independence. There's nothing left to say. He sighed dramatically as if trying to maintain the upper hand. Look, I know you're angry. And I get it. But this whole thing has gotten out of hand. You need to stop before things get worse. I raised an eyebrow, amused by his sudden change in tone. What are you going to do, Ben? Threaten me? That's your go-to move, isn't it? There was a pause on the other end. I'm not threatening you, he said, his voice low. But I will do whatever it takes to fix this. I'll make things right. Just tell me what you want. What did I want? That was the question I had been asking myself for days. I didn't want money. I didn't want revenge. I wanted justice for Lily. For the years he had spent manipulating everyone around him, using his charm to hide his true nature. I want you to pay for what you've done, I said, my voice steady. I want you to face the consequences of your actions. And I want you to understand that you can't take from people and expect to get away with it. There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then Ben laughed, a bitter, hollow sound. You really think I'm going to let you ruin me over a stupid van? You're making a big mistake, Jenna. I didn't sell the van to hurt you. I did it to help us all. The anger flared up again, but I kept my voice steady. You didn't do anything to help anyone, Ben. You only helped yourself. And now it's over. There's nothing left for you to take. I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking from the conversation. It was the first time I had truly felt in control of the situation. Ben was used to getting away with things, but not anymore. He had made a fatal mistake by underestimating me. The next few days were filled with legal meetings and updates. We were moving forward, and I could feel the pressure building on Ben. The fraud investigation was in full swing, and the bank was working to recover the stolen funds. The buyer of the van was cooperating fully, and the documents Ben had forged were being examined by experts. But the real turning point came when the police contacted me. They had gathered enough evidence to charge Ben with multiple counts of fraud and theft. The investigation was officially underway, and I was no longer just a victim, I was a key player in bringing him down. I had never been more certain of anything in my life. But even as the walls closed in on Ben, there was still one thing I had to face, my parents. They still hadn't come to terms with what had happened. They still didn't understand why I was doing this. They still didn't see the bigger picture. I knew I couldn't keep avoiding them forever. But I wasn't sure I was ready to confront them. Not yet. That afternoon I drove to their house. I had no plan, no script, just a determination to get through this. When I arrived, my mother was sitting on the porch, her face creased with worry. She stood up as soon as she saw me, her expression desperate. Jenna, you have to stop this, she said, her voice shaky. This isn't you. This isn't who we are. Ben is your brother. We're family. I shook my head, the frustration bubbling up. You're still defending him. After everything he's done, you're still defending him. She flinched as though I had struck her. He made a mistake. He didn't mean to hurt anyone. I let out a bitter laugh. A mistake? This is not a mistake. This is theft. And you've enabled him for years, Mom. You've always let him get away with it. I don't want to lose you, she whispered, tears filling her eyes. I can't lose you too. I felt a pang of guilt, but it was quickly replaced by something stronger. I'm not the one destroying the family. Ben is. And you've all been blind to it. I turned and walked away, the weight of my words hanging in the air behind me. This was the hardest part. But it was done. There was no going back now. The next few days were a blur of meetings, legal documents, and phone calls. Ben was unraveling, his desperation growing with each passing hour. I could feel the shift in the air, he knew the end was coming, and he was doing everything he could to avoid it. But there was no escaping the truth. The pieces of his web had been pulled apart, and the evidence against him was mounting. Jacob had been working tirelessly behind the scenes, keeping me updated with every development. The investigation into the fraud was moving faster than we'd expected, and Ben was growing increasingly paranoid. The more he pushed back, the harder he made it for himself. I received a message from Jacob one afternoon. We've got him. The bank flagged another suspicious transaction. He tried to move funds through an offshore account. We've got a clear trail now. I could hardly believe it. This was it. We had him cornered. Ben's entire empire of lies was collapsing, and there was no way out. The next few days felt like a countdown. The police had gathered all the necessary evidence, and the charges against Ben were officially filed. Fraud, theft, and forgery. They were serious charges, the kind that could send him to prison for years. But for me, the victory wasn't in the legal proceedings, it was in knowing that he could never hurt me or Lily again. But even as I basked in the small sense of justice, there was still a part of me that couldn't let go of the past. My parents had yet to come to terms with what had happened. They were still in denial, still defending Ben, still trying to make excuses for him. And each time I spoke to them, I felt the weight of their disappointment. I had finally reached the point where I was no longer willing to protect them from the truth. That evening, my phone rang. It was my mother again. I had been avoiding her calls for days, but I knew I couldn't keep doing that. Not if I wanted to move forward. "Jenna," she said, her voice shaking. "I know you're angry. But this has gone too far. Ben is your brother. Please, just come home. We can fix this. We can make it right." I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I had to say what needed to be said. "Mom, this isn't about Ben anymore. This is about what he did. He sold Lily's van. He stole from us. And you," I stopped, trying to keep my voice steady. "You've always defended him. Always." I could hear her sniffling on the other end, the sound cutting through the silence. I didn't know it was this bad. "You should have known, Mom," I said, the frustration bubbling up inside me. "You should have seen the signs. But you chose to turn a blind eye. You chose him over us." There was a long silence, and when she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Jenna. I just didn't want to lose you." I let out a breath, my heart heavy. "I know, Mom. But I've lost you anyway. You chose him. And now I have to protect Lily. I can't keep pretending like everything is okay." I hung up before she could respond, the weight of the conversation sinking in. It felt final, like a door closing. But it was the right thing to do. I wasn't going to keep making excuses for them. They had made their choices, and now it was time for me to make mine. The next day, Jacob called with the news I had been waiting for. "Ben's been arrested. The police have everything they need. He's been charged, and the fraud investigation is moving forward." I sat there for a moment, processing the words. This was it. The moment I had been working toward for months. Ben had finally been caught. There would be no more running, no more manipulating. He had crossed the line, and now he would face the consequences. I couldn't help but feel a sense of relief, mixed with something else, something deeper. This wasn't just about Ben anymore. It was about reclaiming my life, about taking back what he had stolen from me and Lily. It was about showing the world that even when you're at your lowest, you can still stand tall. But even as the victory loomed before me, there was still one last thing to do. The next afternoon, I went to visit the buyer of the van. The paperwork was all ready, and I had arranged for the van to be returned to us. It wasn't much, but it was a start. It was a piece of the puzzle falling into place. When I arrived at his office, he was waiting for me, the paperwork spread out on his desk. He looked up when I walked in, his face somber. "I've got the van back," he said, sliding the papers toward me. "It's all yours." I felt a lump in my throat as I signed the documents, the reality of it sinking in. It wasn't just a van. It was the symbol of everything I had fought for, the first real step in taking back control. As I walked out of his office, I couldn't help but feel a sense of finality. This was it. I had won. Ben had lost. The weight I had been carrying for so long was finally starting to lift. But as I drove home, a thought lingered in my mind: what would the future hold now? What would happen after all of this? I didn't know, but one thing was certain: I was ready for whatever came next. The following weeks were a whirlwind of legal proceedings and phone calls. As the fraud case progressed, it became clear that Ben's fate was sealed. The evidence against him was overwhelming, and he had no way out. But even as his world crumbled, I couldn't help but feel a sense of emptiness. This victory, as sweet as it was, felt hollow in the grand scheme of things. I had finally taken control of my life, but at what cost? The stress of the past few months weighed heavily on me, and I could see it affecting Lily too. The trauma of losing her van, the one thing that had given her independence, had taken its toll on her. I watched her closely, noticing the small changes in her demeanor. She wasn't the same carefree girl she had been before. But she was strong, and that strength was something I admired. We both were. I spent the next few days focused on her, making sure she was adjusting to the changes, making sure she was still happy. I took her to therapy, to her art class, anywhere that gave her a sense of normalcy. I had promised her that everything would get better, and I intended to keep that promise. But as the legal battle continued, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was still something missing. One evening, I received an unexpected text from Jacob. The DA's office has filed formal charges. Ben will likely be facing a lengthy prison sentence. We've also managed to freeze the last of his assets. I read the message several times, the weight of it settling in. It was over. Ben was going to pay for what he had done. I should have felt relief, but instead all I felt was numb. The victory had come at such a high price. My family had torn itself apart, and even though I had fought for what was right, there was still a hole in my heart that I couldn't fill. I set the phone down and looked over at Lily, who was sitting on the couch, scribbling in her sketchbook. She had a calm, focused expression on her face, one I hadn't seen in a while. She was drawing a picture of a van, her van, surrounded by flowers. I could tell she was trying to make sense of everything that had happened. I walked over and sat beside her, watching her work. "That's beautiful, sweetheart," I said quietly, running my fingers through her hair. She looked up at me, her eyes full of understanding. "It's not the van, Mom. It's everything else. All the stuff that went wrong, but it's getting better now, right?" I smiled, my heart aching with pride. "Yes, baby. It's getting better." She handed me the sketch, her eyes wide with hope. "I want to show it to my class. I think they'll understand." I looked at the drawing, the simple yet profound image of a van surrounded by life, by color, by hope. It was exactly what we needed to move forward. And it was a reminder that even in the darkest times, there was always a way to find beauty. The next few days passed in a blur of legal updates and quiet moments at home. Ben's trial was looming, and as the date approached, I began to prepare myself for the final confrontation. I had to face him in court. I had to see him, to hear him lie again, to watch as he tried to paint himself as the victim. It wouldn't be easy, but I had come this far. I couldn't back down now. The night before the trial, I sat in bed, staring at the ceiling. Lily was asleep in her room, the sound of her steady breathing a comfort. I thought back to everything that had led me here. The years of protecting my family, the years of sacrifice, the pain of watching Ben take and take without ever giving anything back. And yet I had fought. I had fought for my daughter. For myself. For the truth. I felt the weight of my decisions pressing down on me, but it wasn't regret. It was resolve. I had done what was necessary, and now it was time to finish what I had started. The trial began the next morning, and I took my seat in the courtroom, my hands clammy with nerves. Ben was sitting at the defense table, his usual cocky smirk replaced by a look of desperation. His lawyer was speaking quietly to him, trying to reassure him, but I knew it was too late. The evidence was too strong and the truth was too clear. I watched as the prosecutor stood and addressed the court. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because one man chose greed over family. One man decided to steal from his own sister, his niece, all to fund his gambling addiction. This man is a danger to society, and he must be held accountable for his actions." The prosecutor's words were sharp, cutting through the air like a knife. I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication. This was it. The end of the road. When it was my turn to testify, I walked to the witness stand, my heart pounding in my chest. I could feel Ben's eyes on me, but I didn't look at him. I didn't need to. This was my moment to speak the truth, to make sure that everyone knew what he had done. I took a deep breath and began. "I am here today because my brother betrayed me. He sold my daughter's van, the one thing that gave her independence, and he lied to everyone. He manipulated my parents, and he manipulated me. And he's done it for years. I trusted him, and he used that trust to take from me. But not anymore." I felt the weight of the words settle in. It wasn't just about the van. It was about the years of lies, the years of being taken advantage of. It was about the fact that my family had always chosen Ben over me. But not today. Today I was choosing myself. And Lily. And the truth. The trial continued, the evidence presented, and slowly Ben's defenses crumbled. His lies fell apart and the truth became undeniable. He was guilty and everyone in that courtroom knew it. By the end of the day, the verdict was clear: Ben was going to prison. For years he had taken from us and now he would pay the price. It wasn't the end of the pain, but it was the beginning of the healing. I walked out of the courtroom, my heart heavy but my steps steady. I had won. And for the first time in a long time I felt a sense of peace. The battle was over. Now it was time to rebuild. The weeks after Ben's conviction felt like a blur. The weight of everything that had happened seemed to settle in all at once. The courtroom victory, the legal battles, the heartbreak, it all hit me harder than I had expected. But even as the dust began to settle, I knew that the real work had only just begun. I spent my days focusing on what really mattered: Lily and our future. I couldn't change the past, couldn't undo the years of manipulation, the lies, the betrayal. But I could control the present. I could choose to build something better for the two of us. The van, now safely back in our possession, became a symbol of that new beginning. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a reminder that we were free. Free from the toxic grip of my family, free from the manipulation and control. For the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly moving forward. One afternoon, I took Lily to the park again. The sun was shining, the air crisp and fresh. It was one of those rare moments when everything felt right. We sat on the bench, watching the other kids play, and for a brief moment, I let myself forget everything that had happened. Lily turned to me, her face lit up with a bright, wide smile. "Mom, look at this." She wheeled herself over to a nearby playground structure, where a group of kids were hanging out. The moment she rolled up, they smiled at her and started chatting, inviting her to play with them. It was a simple thing, a small moment, but it meant the world to me. It meant that Lily was finding her place again, that she was beginning to feel like she belonged. I watched her, my heart swelling with pride. She was so strong, stronger than I had ever been at her age. She had been through more than any child should, but she was still here, still fighting. And I would fight for her every day for the rest of my life. Later that evening, I received a message from Jacob. "We've finalized everything with the bank. Ben's assets are being liquidated, and the recovery process is complete. It's all over, Jenna. You've won." I stared at the message for a long moment, feeling the weight of those words sink in. It was over. It had taken everything: my family, my peace of mind, my trust in people, but in the end I had won. Lily had won. We had both won. But there was still a long road ahead. The aftermath of Ben's actions had left scars that wouldn't fade overnight. My relationship with my parents was shattered, and though I had made my peace with it, it didn't make it any easier. They still hadn't accepted what had happened. They still hadn't come to terms with the fact that I had chosen to protect Lily, to protect myself, instead of trying to hold on to the broken pieces of our family. And then there was Ben. He was in prison, but the damage he had done couldn't be undone. The betrayal, the years of manipulation, the way he had used my love and trust to hurt me, those scars would take time to heal. But the one thing I knew for sure was that I had my daughter. I had her love, her strength, and her unwavering belief in me. And that was all that mattered. The next day, I drove Lily to her therapy session. She was talking nonstop about her art class, about how her friends were starting to understand her more, about how she was finally starting to feel like she belonged. Her smile never left her face, and for the first time in a long time I could see the light in her eyes again. We arrived at the clinic, and I helped her out of the car, walking beside her as she wheeled herself into the building. She was growing, adapting, and I was so proud of her. This was what I had fought for. This was why I had done everything I had done. As we entered the clinic, Natasha, her therapist, greeted us with a warm smile. "How's my favorite patient doing today?" she asked, her tone light and friendly. "I'm doing great," Lily said, her voice full of energy. "I finished my new art project and I'm going to show it to my class next week." I smiled at her enthusiasm. "That's awesome, sweetheart." After Lily's session, we headed home. As we drove, I felt a calm wash over me. There was still so much to fix, so much to rebuild. But for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were on the right path. When we got home, Lily went straight to her room to work on her art. I sat down at the kitchen table, my mind swirling with the future. There were still unanswered questions about my parents, about Ben, about where we would go from here. But for the first time, I didn't feel burdened by those questions. I felt hopeful. And that was a feeling I hadn't experienced in a long time. I thought about the journey ahead. The road to healing wouldn't be easy, but it was ours to walk. Together. I picked up my phone and sent a message to Jacob. Thank you. We've made it. I couldn't have done this without you. I put the phone down and looked out the window, watching the sun set over the horizon. It was a new day. And it was ours to shape.